Today, we're going to talk about what Disney might build in 2023 and 2024 and beyond. In part, we're going to explore what might be announced at the D23 Expo. But we will also identify likely project areas in each of the 6 American parks beyond the Expo announcements, considering what changes are likely and what attractions might be developed. As we're moving toward the D23 Expo, the first expo in 3 years, our podcast has a slightly different release schedule for the next 2 weeks. I know I said I would put up a short update in the middle of this week discussing possible expo announcements related to the parks, but once I arranged my notes into a script, the episode turned out to be not short at all. It's about 9,000 words. This episode script is actually much longer than a typical episode, but also a very detailed breakdown and analysis of where the American parks might expand and how those expansions would or would not help Disney. So we've got a lot to discuss in today's episode, as we look at the future of the Disney parks in America and what might be coming to them in the years ahead. The Expo is the venue where Disney announces new projects, typically projects that will be started but perhaps not finished over the next 2 years. Many key projects related to film and the streaming service have either been announced already or leaked, but projects for the parks are still a bit of a mystery, and there's some underlying reasons why these projects are still a mystery. Over the past 2 years, in part due to the pandemic and in part due to an attempt to relocate the Glendale Imagineering office to Florida, the number of Imagineers at the main California campus has fallen from over 1,000 to just a few hundred. This means that Disney has far fewer people to design new attractions and lands, even if those designs are further developed and realized by outside companies. Add in now Disney's financial planning model, along with reduced personnel. Lower earnings during the pandemic has caused Disney to reduce its CapEx funds, essentially the capital expenditures it uses to develop and construct new attractions, meaning that the overall possibilities for development might be smaller for the coming 2 years than for the 2 years that just ended. Now factor in this, the possibility of a recession in the near future. If Disney believes a recession is inevitable, they will be less likely to announce large projects, as large projects might not produce the intended attendance bump and the predicted return on investment. A recession will reduce families' discretionary spending on vacations, especially if the US and Europe continue to see high inflation. Add in now high gas prices, which is a core metric of the present inflationary cycle. And you'll see a scenario in which families in the South and families in California visit the resorts less often. Taken together, these economic pressures may limit what Disney will announce due to financial and labor constraints. But on the other side of the equation, there are pressures that should encourage Disney to make some large announcements, even if the upcoming years look to be financially unfavorable. And in this, there are a couple of meaningful areas to look at. First, it's no secret that Universal is working at a fast pace in Orlando to finish its 3rd park by the summer of 2025, a park that will include another Harry Potter-themed area. So Disney will need new attractions around which to develop marketing plans in the second half of this decade to counter-market against Universal and its new park, a park that has 4 deeply themed lands and a dozen or more new rides. Disney will have nowhere near a dozen new attractions ready by 2025 or even 2026. But it will likely need a couple of headliners around which to build a successful marketing campaign. This type of planning will matter to Disney's bottom line. And as the executive suite over in Burbank is far more focused on financials than on creative experimentation, I expect this line of thinking will shape some of their decisions. If there is no meaningful response to Epic Universe, Disney may see a significant percentage of guests who would have stayed on Disney property instead opt for hotels over at Universal. Hotels are one of the largest income centers for the Disney property in Florida. Sadly, to protect hotel occupancy, Disney will almost surely be forced into arranging some large announcements whether or not there's a recession, to protect its hotel market share from the growing number of hotel rooms that Universal presently has and is continuing to open. Second, it's also no secret that the company management, particularly Bob Chapek, has alienated park fans. As far as I can tell, Chapek hasn't alienated Marvel fans or Star Wars fans. In fact, most Star Wars fans seem reasonably happy with The Mandalorian, Boba Fett, and Obi-Wan, nor has he angered fans of animation. Again, most seem reasonably satisfied with efforts like Encanto. This is not to say that film fans don't quibble with decisions made by corporate executives. There are definitely places to quibble. But overall, those whose fan involvement with Disney is primarily arranged through films haven't arranged their anger into a red-hot spear of discontent pointed directly at Bob Chapek. Whereas in the park fan community, Chapek has been deeply vilified to the point where he has been broadly presented as the one person removing the magic from the parks with poorly funded projects, a nickel-and-diming approach to raise profits, such as with Genie Plus, and a lack of understanding for how fans connect with the resorts. That is, a lot of fans come to the park to escape urban America and are upset with areas inside the park that now look like giant food courts or nondescript box stores, the same types of installations that inhabit most any city. The situation has grown so serious that I think there's now a possibility that Chapek might actually be booed while on stage at the expo. If you're looking for a troubling moment at the expo, just wait to see if Josh D'Amaro announces that the Circular Theater at Disneyland, the one that once housed Carousel of Progress and then America Sings, will be raised to create an outdoor seating space that again resembles a food court. That circular theater certainly either needs to be reimagined or replaced, but the announcement of another large food court area or a large retail area, if I'm reading the room correctly, will likely be met with some vocal disappointment. It's these moments where plans approved by Chapek seem not to understand why and how longtime fans connect with parks, largely as visual and experiential breaks from the type of experiences that exist outside the berm. Chapek's most recent blunder was on the August earnings call, where he explained that in his estimation, profits were down at Disneyland due to, and here I'll quote him, an unfavorable attendance mix at Disneyland Resort. By that he meant there were too many annual pass holders in the park, or what are now called magic key holders, compared to traditional tourists visiting on a day ticket who tend to spend more on meals, souvenirs, and hotel rooms. In essence, he identified that pass holders, or at least pass holders en masse, were, in his opinion, unfavorable. As a result, multiple people have designed t-shirts that say things like unfavorable attendance mix or unfavorable attendee for sale on sites such as TeePublic, Etsy, and even Amazon. Just go over to Amazon and type in the phrase unfavorable attendance mix if you want a visual. Most of these shirts use the juice tone color scheme of the Magic Key program. Many also include the image of a key so that no one is confused as to the intended message. If you are going to the expo, expect to see some fans wearing these t-shirts as they wander the halls, which for Disney execs will make for some tense moments. To make matters worse, in recent months, I've seen the online discontent that was originally targeted solely at Chapek spill out toward other executives, such as Josh D'Amaro, who is the chairperson of Disney Parks and Resorts, suggesting that he may be complicit in some of these less-than-loved new policy changes. And I don't want to harp on Chapek too long because in areas of film and the streaming service, the company has fared much better in terms of fan support. But Chapek seems to have difficulty understanding that park fans, I like the term parkies, have a different relationship with Disney experiences than compared to fans of movies. People who watch a movie or a TV show, engage it for an hour or two, are typically satisfied, and then move on to other activities. Fans of the park often want to engage that experience for an entire day, or more likely, many days at a time, making their relationship closer to a lifestyle choice than an intermittent appreciation for Disney-produced entertainment. In recent months, the fan animosity has become a significant public relations problem, more so than I think the company recognizes. Disney Parks pass holders, mostly longtime fans, historically have evangelized the parks and encouraged others to visit. Right now, many longtime fans are complaining to their friends about the parks and keeping them away. And so from this angle, Disney needs one or maybe two announcements that are tied to the interest of the parkies, those longtime fans. That's one way that Disney can begin to climb out of this hole. I know that if you're deeply involved in the parks fan community, it's easy to believe that most everyone in the larger Disney sphere deeply dislikes Chapek. But the strongest concentrations of those feelings are centered in the parks community. Lastly, Expo announcements are considered revised and edited in the weeks leading up to the Expo. From what I understand, the 2019 Expo announcements were edited in the day leading up to the presentation, with some of those announcements removed at the last minute. Even those announcements that were presented, such as the Mary Poppins attraction, were often so vague it was clear that very little development had been yet accomplished. In 2019, the Mary Poppins attraction was described as an area in the UK World Showcase Pavilion where guests could walk down Cherry Tree Lane, past Admiral Boom's nautical house, and then enter the home of the Banks family, where the adventure would begin. But what exactly was that adventure? A dark ride? An indoor carousel themed to the Jolly Holiday sequence? A stage show with musical numbers? A character meet and greet? Maybe a really, really elaborate churro cart? No one knows, because those elements were never described, neither in text nor art. And during pandemic-focused reductions, the Mary Poppins addition to the UK Pavilion quietly fell away from planning discussions. So, assuming the current Expo develops like the last Expo, Disney probably won't finalize the full slate of approved announcements until shortly before the park's presentation. In fact, probably right now, they're going over what they might and might not announce. So today, we'll look at the 6 American parks along with the shopping areas and discuss what areas are ripe for improvement and also how likely these improvements will be announced at the Expo. But again, part of the guiding criteria here is that Disney needs to counter-program against Universal's new park, Epic Universe. It's really too late now to announce anything of size such as an entire new land, let alone an entire park. Disney simply takes too long to build these projects. But a number of individual projects will help keep Disney in the announcement cycle as Universal rolls out its 3rd theme park. That's the first problem that underpins the Expo in terms of the parks. The other is that Disney needs a deep course correction in terms of how it publicly connects with longtime fans. And beyond this, some of what will be announced for the parks will be tied to the company's 100th anniversary, which is officially October 16th, 2023, at which time many divisions in the company will look over its collective history. The only division that is actually 100 years old is the animation division. Everything else was started long after 1923. As longtime fans know, The parks are places of anniversaries. Last year it was Disney World's 50th, next year it's the company's 100th, and in 2025 Disneyland will turn 70, and in 2028 Mickey will turn 100. The upcoming celebration for this next year is called officially 100 Years of Wonder, so you can expect some temporary additions to the parks, such as parades, museum-style installations, fireworks, and live entertainment, all keyed to the 100-year marker. Expect a new or updated parade, as well as changes to Harmonious and the Magic Kingdom fireworks. These announcements will likely come early in the presentation, if Josh D'Amaro, on stage, takes a long time with this, especially with a lengthy video montage of the 100th anniversary and the company's history. Expect fewer announcements concerning attractions. But if these elements are moved through quickly with some artwork and other visuals, you can be hopeful early on that more time will be spent on attractions. Attractions, in my opinion, are the more important announcement here, because not only are they more costly than a parade or a revised fireworks presentation, they have a far longer shelf life than the temporary anniversary elements. Okay, so let's take a look at the individual parks and discuss what may be announced for each of them. And we'll start in Florida. Back in 2019, the large announcements were centered on Epcot, with many Epcot projects eventually being outright canceled, such as the multi-story Festival Center, and others simply fading away or endlessly being delayed, such as the Play Pavilion, the Mary Poppins themed area, a new film for the China Pavilion, and a deep update to Spaceship Earth. In 2019, a dozen new or deeply updated attractions, including film-based attractions, were announced at the expo for the Florida parks. I don't think we'll see a dozen announced this time. I think we'll see far closer to half that, based on lower projected spending for capital developments. But that should mean that there's something announced for most, if not every park. There will probably be more attention given yet again to Epcot, but also to Animal Kingdom, a little less attention given to Magic Kingdom and the studios, even though the studios has the fewest attraction areas of any Disney park. Let's start with Animal Kingdom. The last new attraction that opened at Disney's Animal Kingdom appeared over 5 years ago, and there's nothing presently under construction. At minimum, even if something is announced, this is a park that will not have had a major addition in 7 to 8 years by the time that new attraction opens. With Primeval World now removed from Dinoland, that piece of real estate is a prime option for an announcement, maybe even a retheming of the whole area. Dinoland always seemed like a quickly made addition with an off-the-shelf spinner and an off-the-shelf coaster lightly themed to the area that never matched the deeply realized design of the rest of the park. In Dinoland presently, there's little left than the Triceratops spinner, some food carts and some games of chance, and a very large parking area for strollers. And next door, the dinosaur ride has recently been plagued with downtime, animatronic failures, and is themed to a movie that hardly anyone under the age of 25 remembers. Dinosaur still has a fabulous ride and track system. It's identical to the enhanced motion vehicles at the far better themed Indiana Jones ride in California. As Chapek knows, it's far less expensive to retheme a ride than to create a new one. Just look at Splash Mountain. In terms of projects for the upcoming years, I see the possibility of an area retheming, removing the remnants of Dinoland, and then upgrading the dinosaur attraction and show building to a new theme to unify the region. If this were to happen, I think that there are some interesting possibilities. Presently, Animal Kingdom lacks family rides suitable for younger children. Its headliner attractions are Expedition Everest, Flight of Passage, and Kelly River Rapids. Yet its central conceit is animals, which speaks deeply to young kids. The identity of the park, along with its purpose, isn't meshing well with its lead attractions. To solve this, Disney could clone some of the offerings being developed for Shanghai's City of Zootopia, presently under construction. This minimizes the cost of development as the rides have already been created. This generally is how Epcot got Ratatouille, and the Magic Kingdom will soon get the Tron coaster. Over at Shanghai Disneyland, WDI is creating the City of Zootopia, so it's possible that some elements from that expansion, assuming that Shanghai doesn't have a limited exclusive right to them once they open, might also be announced for Animal Kingdom. Here's another possibility. I know that there have been hopeful drumbeats that Indiana Jones might join Animal Kingdom, and there's a certain logic to this. The Disney parks have seen the biggest attendant bumps with lands related to PG or PG-13 movies, such as Avatar and Galaxy's Edge. Some version of the Indy ride from California could be reasonably configured into the dinosaur show building, even if the building as presently arranged is nowhere near as large or tall as the show building necessary to house the California version of that ride. Other areas of this land could then pick up Indiana Jones elements from other Disney parks, such as the Temple of Peril coaster from Disneyland Paris. I know that idea is tempting and might be an outside possibility, especially as it would effectively repurpose that dinosaur attraction to a far more relevant film series. But that development would further push Animal Kingdom, which is essentially a zoo, or for those deep fans, not a zoo, toward thrill experiences and away from family-centered adventures. I do think we'll see more of Indy and Florida, only I'm guessing that the Studios is going to be a better landing zone, as the Studios park already has carved out its niche as the park most focused on young adults. And Zootopia, or perhaps another animal-centered film franchise such as Jungle Book, seems a better fit. And that brings me to another possibility. One outlier in terms of ride expansion for this plot of land or elsewhere in Animal Kingdom concerns Lion King, which is likely the best-known piece of Disney animation, aside from Frozen, in the last 30 years. There's the original movie, the sequels, the TV show, and the live-action remake. There's also another planned prequel to the live-action film, in the works focused on the story of Mufasa and his formative years. Animal Kingdom currently has Festival of the Lion King, which is a light musical review featuring songs from the movie. This show still draws a crowd far more than Muppet Vision 3D, and more on that later. But with a new Lion King film in the works, and with Chapek's desire to more deeply integrate Disney IP into the parks, I see a traditional Lion King attraction also as an outside candidate for expansion in this park. Beyond the rides, in terms of zoological representation, Animal Kingdom doesn't pull in much from Australia or even South America, so you might see some exhibit expansion in that direction. And to add to the guesswork here, if you see some element of Encanto and its home country, Colombia, end up in Epcot in the projects that are announced this week, don't expect to see a South American push presently in Animal Kingdom. But if Encanto comes up empty in Epcot, some version of a natural representation of the Colombian landscape may end up here. Remember in the film, Antonio Madrigal, one of the three central characters, can talk to the animals. So this would allow for exhibits of capybaras, jaguars, tapirs, and toucans, all under the creative umbrella of an Encanto-related animal project. And in a couple of minutes, we'll get back to the possibility of World Showcase pavilions, perhaps tied or lightly tied to Encanto. Another area that needs to be filled in at Animal Kingdom is the Discovery River stage, now that Rivers of Light has ended. The lack of a nighttime show is still one of this park's biggest problems. Without a way to keep guests at Animal Kingdom after sunset, guests generally hop over to another park, placing larger crowd burdens on the Magic Kingdom, Epcot, and the studios, which is particularly noticeable during the holidays. There might be some smaller announcements here as well. The flow of the expo stage is typically one big announcement followed by a minor one. And for this park, over in Pandora, WDI might also experiment with a light redressing of an attraction or show experience to tie it more closely to Avatar 2: The Way of Water, when the film is released in December. But now let's jump over to another park. Disney's Hollywood Studio has had two large expansions in recent years, Toy Story Land and Galaxy's Edge, along with Mickey's Runaway Railway as a standalone attraction. It also has the most expensive and longest thrill ride in the entire resort, which is Rise of the Resistance. Despite this, the park still has the lowest number of rides of any American Disney park. With Rise of the Resistance, the park doesn't need a new e-ticket to move guests through those tap styles. I don't think there will be a big dollar attraction announced for the studios. If we do see immediate expansion at the studios, I think we will see smaller announcements, maybe a plan to integrate more recent Star Wars characters such as Mando, Boba Fett, and Ahsoka into Galaxy's Edge. Possibly an update to the Indiana Jones Stunt Spectacular to tie it in to the 5th Indiana Jones film that will be released next June, and as an outlier, some update to Rock and Roller Coaster. In Paris, that ride has been updated to an Iron Man and Captain Marvel attraction, but something needs to be done with the Florida version, though it won't likely be tied to Marvel. I love Aerosmith, but admittedly I'm old enough to remember when they were constantly on the radio, and just saying radio dates me as well, because most people now listen to Pandora or YouTube. It's been nearly 20 years since Aerosmith last hit the top 10 in the US and about 25 years since they had a top 10 hit overseas. Most teenagers simply have no idea who they are other than they're a rock band. Due to that contract governing the Marvel characters east of the Mississippi, an Iron Man clone can't come to Hollywood Studios, at least not right now. And besides, that version of the ride has been a center of problems over in Paris. But Rock and Roller Coaster does need some type of retheming to make its visual property more relevant to a younger audience. It's in an area that is overall themed to mid-century Los Angeles. To be honest, not a lot of great possibilities are leaping out at me, such as a way to connect the area theme with a movie-centered theme inside the attraction. What Disney movies are set in LA or somewhere close by? Well, there's Who Framed Roger Rabbit, The Rocketeer, Chip and Dale, Rescue Rangers, including that new movie, and in Cars, the Piston Cup is at the Los Angeles International Speedway. But after that, the picking for LA-centered Disney themes isn't great. In a similar vein, as a long shot, Muppet Vision 3D has existed at this park for over 33 years with no meaningful updates. Even on busy days, the show has little to no line, and the theater itself is often half empty. Disney presently has a biopic in development about Jim Henson, the creator of the Muppets, along with a new limited series on Disney Plus called Muppet Mayhem. There's a small chance that this may be the moment to refresh an attraction that is over 3 decades old. Lastly, we'll almost surely get a reopening date for Fantasmic, along with a description of new show scenes that have been added to the show. And we'll probably get an announcement for a new show that will take over the Voyage of the Little Mermaid Theater, which has been closed now for over 2 years. It's possible that we may see an announcement of a new Little Mermaid show keyed to the live-action remake due out in 2023, or we may see an announcement to remake the Animation Courtyard, as the Animation Courtyard no longer has a role in the park's larger identity as a set of expanded themed environments. E-ticket attractions get the most attention during expo announcements, but Hollywood Studios already has a lot of D and E-ticket attractions. But what this park lacks are B and C-ticket attractions to fill out the offerings and to make the park feel like a full-day experience. These quieter attractions are what the park needs to balance itself, but I've heard no rumblings that announcements may move in that direction. One last thing for the studios. The Disney Company, as I mentioned, is about to celebrate its 100th year in 2023. This will be a celebration that is embraced by multiple areas of the company. Parades celebrating this achievement will likely go to other parks, but the studios may be the venue for an exhibit that explores the early years of the Disney studio with animation efforts leading to Alice, and that's the live-action Alice from the 1920s, Oswald, and then Mickey, perhaps with new additions or a special gallery in the One Man's Dream museum space. The studios, I think, are also the likely place for a nighttime show that features, along with fireworks, film clips that track the 100-year history of Disney cartoons and movies. I think that Epcot is somewhat of a wild card this year. It has Cosmic Rewind, Ratatouille, Space 220, and Harmonious all having opened in the past year. But it also has a number of delayed or canceled projects, also some areas still under construction in which fans still don't have the full details. We will almost surely get an update about attractions presently being constructed, including the Journey of Water, Dreamer's Point, with the statue of Walt. We'll probably see far more detailed artwork for what is being built now in the area once earmarked for the Festival Center. I suspect we'll see updates to Harmonious, but beyond that, Disney may revisit previously announced attractions that fell away from site plans during COVID. At the top of this list is the Play Pavilion, first announced in 2019 and then delayed. The structure is there, it's the abandoned Wonders of Life Pavilion, and the new pavilion arrangement is designed as modular space with some small screen-based areas that can be updated as new films and projects are released. Also on this list of delayed projects is an update to Spaceship Earth, which will realign the attraction from the history of human communication to the history of storytelling, with lots of the existing sets from the cave people up through the age of computers simply being reworked into the new theme with new onboard narration. Some new stages would be added to introduce and close the ride. I've walked through Spaceship Earth recently, and this attraction needs a deep refurbishment, from the Omni-Movers to the show stages themselves. The low light levels and the theatrical spots hide a lot of the damage, but it's there. This is, of course, the thesis attraction at Epcot, the one that presumably explains what the park is about. Even without this update, it still needs significant work, probably enough to close it for the better part of a year. But in terms of that logic, if it goes down for a year, wouldn't that also be the time to update it? Another long shot here is some plan for a revised Journey into Imagination, an attraction that back in the 1980s was a glorious visual reflection on the creative process, featuring Dreamfinder and Figment. But two updates have edited down this attraction to a shell of its former self, an attraction that rarely has a standby line that is longer than 5 minutes. There's the existing building, there's a ride system in place. If they remove the track and level out those floors, they could use this same space for a trackless ride system, and if they remove the work areas at the back of the show building, that's where they wash those 3D glasses for many attractions throughout the resort. There's the possibility, then, of creating a much larger ride area, something that might match the length and scope of the original ride. Essentially, as Disney chopped up the first version of Journey into Imagination, they allocated parts of the show building for back-of-the-house operations like a 3D glass wash center. A plan like this would fit within Chapek's model of revising existing attractions to minimize cost. It would also help center Epcot on its most popular original character, Figment, which sells piles of merchandise each year. But most significantly, an announcement like this would help repair the discontent experienced by hardcore fans, those who generally dislike Chapek and company. These fans have followed the parks for years, often decades. For many of them, the two biggest mistakes ever made by management concerning Epcot are the removal of Horizons and the slow gutting of Journey into Imagination. We can argue over which of these rides was a more successful expression of ideas and art on a later show, but right now, for the company to restore one of these rides and reunite Dreamfinder and Figment would overcome some of the hard feelings that presently exist for fans. This pavilion clearly needs an update to its centerpiece ride, also to its secondary experience. That other space may be where we find a smaller attraction with the characters from Inside Out at Disney World. I'm not sure that either of these elements will be announced, but I do think this would be a savvy move on the part of the Disney team, not only to upgrade the Imagination Pavilion, but also to repair their relationship with some of their most important fans. Another long shot here is the canceled Mary Poppins attraction. Also announced in 2019, might be brought back into the UK Pavilion in some form. This is another film property with a long history as a possible attraction. In the late 1960s, while Tony Baxter was in college as a student, he put together a presentation book that explained how such an attraction would work at Disneyland. His idea was to arrange the Jolly Holiday sequence into a dark ride. Guests would enter a dark ride seated on a carousel horse, where they would then encounter the Pearly Band and dancing penguins before continuing onto Cherry Tree Lane. Though Tony Baxter would later become one of, if not the most famous Imagineer of the past 4 decades, his idea for a Mary Poppins dark ride was never picked up by Imagineering. A different plan was, however, developed in the 1980s by another Imagineer, Paul Turigano. In his concept, guests would walk in through Cherry Tree Lane and then board again a carousel horse that would function as the ride vehicle. Only this time, the vehicles wouldn't just take guests to the Jolly Holiday sequence, but through key scenes for the entire movie, from flying over the rooftops of London to afternoon tea on the ceiling with Uncle Albert. The most recent version of the Mary Poppins attraction was announced in 2019 with very little definition aside from some artwork that presented the exteriors of Cherry Tree Lane behind the UK Pavilion. What would be in that show building, I think, is anyone's guess, or at least was anyone's guess in 2019, including most Imagineers. But this concept fits neatly with the overall framework Chapek has championed for years in World Showcase, specifically to expand out pavilions with Disney IP that supports the cultural identity of the host country. France gives way to the streets of Paris and Ratatouille, Norway opens up to Frozen Ever After, Mexico is arranged with Grand Fiesta featuring the Three Caballeros, and so on. A Mary Poppins area at the back of the UK Pavilion is simply a variation on this theme. Also, over in World Showcase, maybe we will finally get a new pavilion. The last pavilion to open there was Norway, which opened nearly 35 years ago in 1988. The pavilions typically, when they open, are sponsored by a country or business interests. I know that there's fan interest in opening a Colombia pavilion that then could be tied to Encanto, but there are some large hurdles here. First, who's going to sponsor this pavilion, as it's unlikely to be sponsored by the Colombian government? Second, as it would be the only South American pavilion at World Showcase, could it then represent the region? And lastly, from a political standpoint, does it make sense for Disney to include Colombia in World Showcase, or due to political instability and other factors, might such a pavilion cause perception problems for the park in the future? An interesting workaround here, I think, would be to expand the definition of a World Showcase pavilion. Most pavilions are focused on single countries. A slight variation is the UK, which collects and represents the nations of England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. But if Disney were to loosen its definition of a pavilion, it might create pavilions that are conglomerates of countries or an expression of a region. The abandoned Africa pavilion would have worked like this, though it was never built. A pavilion themed to South America as a region might solve a lot of these problems. The pavilion then would not be tied to any specific government, but rather to a dozen countries and a few territories. Likewise, a South American pavilion opens up more IP tie-ins than a single country pavilion could support. Beyond Encanto, a pavilion with a general South American theme could include Emperor's Last Groove, Pixar's Up, and the Brazilian sections of Saludos Amigos, which I realize might be a little too closely tied to the Three Caballeros attraction over at the Mexico Pavilion. But that still leaves Emperor's Last Groove, Up, and Encanto. Moreover, if this pavilion were to focus on the region, it might be easier to find financial sponsors for the development as opposed to a pavilion limited to just one country. At the moment, the largest regions not included in World Showcase are Eastern Europe, Australia, and South America, with the caveat that the cultures of Africa are deeply represented now at both Animal Kingdom and, more significantly, Animal Kingdom Lodge, which has some engaging art and cultural exhibits. One last consideration for Epcot is Wondrous China, that Circle Vision film that was in development back in 2018 and 2019. I was told at the end of 2019 that the film was entirely shot, though likely not edited or scored. This film uses a new system of seamless projection, in which projectors are mounted in the center of the room to project moving images out to the sides, removing those gaps presently found on Disney Circle Vision screens. I was also told that Disney was having some issues moving the footage out of China, which may have been a polite way of indicating that the Chinese government wasn't completely happy with some elements of the picture. That again is an interpretation. But that project, in some form, still rests inside of WDI and could now be a low-cost addition to the park. But here, we now need to shift over to the Magic Kingdom. For the Magic Kingdom, no doubt we'll get an update on the retheming of Splash Mountain to Tiana's Bayou Adventure. The current version of Splash Mountain will almost surely close shortly after the winter holidays. This really is the only possible hope of having the attraction ready for late 2024. And personally, I expect this timeline to be a little too rushed to restage the ride and refurbish the system. I think we'll see this date pushed back a little as things move along. But I don't expect that Josh tomorrow will discuss the closure of the ride while on stage, including when it will close, as there's a group of fans who oppose its closure. Rather, he'll almost surely focus on how the ride will change. By this point, WDI should have significant artwork to share on how this new attraction will be staged in the existing structure. We might also see models of AA figures. Also, we'll get an update on the Tron coaster almost surely with an opening date. I know that there has been a lot of hopeful speculation that Tron might open for the winter holidays. The Tron coaster is presently testing in 1-minute cycles. It's also been testing with its canopy lights on, but my guess here is that some of this is to gather video footage that will be shown at the expo. Though I could be wrong. I think a winter opening is unlikely. It's not that with a big push, Disney couldn't complete the coaster before December. Rather, many winter vacations have already been booked. Those people are coming with or without Tron. Some of those vacations were booked due to interest in Cosmic Rewind. From a marketing standpoint, Disney needs a major attraction to anchor 2023. There's still hardscape and landscape to finish, which I suspect will be drawn out. I believe that this ride is more likely to appear in 2023, with advertising, cast member previews, and AP previews and a soft opening either tied to spring or Memorial Day. It's not so much when the coaster can be ready, but when the coaster will have the largest impact on potential visitation. But neither Tron nor the retheming of Splash Mountain are new announcements. And again, if the montage video presentation of Tron and concept art for Tiana's Bayou Adventure go on for many minutes, that is likely the signal that there will be no large announcement for the Magic Kingdom. But personally, I suspect there will be some announcement of a new attraction in the Magic Kingdom beyond any announcement of a parade or fireworks. The most likely location for a new attraction in this park is over in Tomorrowland. That building that previously held Stitch's Great Escape has been empty now for 4 years, with no meaningful work aside from demolition of the show areas for Stitch. This, I think, is the likely location for an announced attraction, perhaps themed to Wreck-It Ralph. As in California, the Buzz Lightyear attraction here looks tired. It needs an update. One may have been considered here. If the new Lightyear film did better business at the box office. The film took in a disappointing $226 million worldwide, which was lower than expected even calculating in the Disney Plus audience, the lingering concerns about COVID in theaters, and those countries that through censorship blocked the film. Or to put this in comparison with another Pixar film, 4 years ago, Incredibles 2 took in $1.2 billion. So I doubt there are any plans to presently rework Buzz Lightyear to a 2022 Lightyear theme, though some update likely will come in the near future. And before we leave the Florida resort, I have one more place to visit on my list. Over at Disney Springs, the biggest vacancy is the building once occupied by the NBA Experience, which was the replacement for Disney Quest. It's a huge piece of real estate, a multi-story building containing about 100,000 square feet, presently empty. To put this in perspective, this is roughly 2/3 the usable square footage space, although arranged onto multiple floors, as in Avengers Campus in California. Over summer, part of this building was used as a VR showroom where guests could try out the Quest 2 headset and also click into a VR game themed to Star Wars, Tales from Galaxy's Edge. Something permanent needs to go here. In August 2021, the company announced that the space would be reimagined. I'd put this too on the long shots list. But this space is definitely one to watch at the Florida resort. Compared with Florida, I think we'll see significantly fewer announced projects for the West Coast. At Disneyland, we'll get a similar set of updates for Splash Mountain and an update for Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway. News for this attraction, I'm guessing, will finally detail how this version of the railway will be slightly different than the one in Florida. It's a screen-based attraction which is reasonably easy to alter. That is, I think the California version will have a slightly altered and perhaps longer track layout, so I expect that Disney will announce that one or more scenes in this version of the ride will be different than those in the Florida attraction, though the overall ride and its story will remain the same. We may get an announcement concerning new additions to Toontown. Presently, the entire area is closed as Mickey and Minnie's is installed. Some of the original Toontown areas will no doubt be removed and replaced. In recent months, the artwork has been visually vague about how the area will be transformed, aside from the park area at the entrance. At this point, we might receive a little more definition as to what will be built. We will almost surely get an announcement over the retheming of the treehouse. Tarzan has left, but which characters will be joining the treehouse in Adventureland hasn't been announced. Hint, a lot of park watchers suggest Encanto, tying into that treehouse bedroom arranged into the film. Another area in the park that needs attention is Tomorrowland. It has an unused circular theater, once home to Carousel of Progress and America Sings. It has people mover tracks that have been empty for over 2 decades. It has a sprawling Autopia course that, for the land-strapped California resort, takes up a lot of acreage. If Autopia was trimmed down to half of its current size, retaining more of the tracks towards Small World, the park would then have room for another coaster, perhaps a Tron clone, with placement of it similar to that at the Magic Kingdom. However, if Autopia was trimmed in the other direction, the park would have an expansion area for Fantasyland. There would be nowhere near enough space for a mini-land, such as the Arendelle expansion that is going into 2 overseas parks, but there would be enough space to clone a ride from that Arendelle expansion. But back to Tomorrowland. As in Florida, Buzz Lightyear in California is showing its age and needs a refresh. Again, with the underperforming Lightyear movie, there isn't presently an obvious pivot for this attraction. The Toy Story franchise is perennial and will no doubt produce new TV shows and maybe a new film in the future, which might be the point at which we see an update. In terms of the park overall, Tomorrowland has the areas that most need to be addressed. Back in 2019, WDI announced a new entrance design for Tomorrowland, which still hasn't been built. But the more serious concerns are inside the land, not just its entrance. These issues are costly, and again with the recession, will Disney pick this moment to address them? If anything, I think that Disney might pick 1 or 2 of these areas and then suggest that more updates will arrive in the near future. But even this might be wishful thinking, as Disneyland has the most attractions of any Disney park in the US, and with a rethemed treehouse, a reimagined Splash Mountain, and the Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, the park might have enough to make it seem fresh for a couple of more years. Again, though, let me point out that the company has an opportunity here to overcome some fan discontent with targeted projects inside of Tomorrowland. Longtime fans are often swayed by nostalgia and for a respect of the past, as the parks and how they evolved are part of their shared history. A plan to return the People Mover, or even a limited version of the People Mover, as its tracks presently cover a large area, would be another move that would quickly undo some of the bad feelings that exist between park fans and the company. There's a significant cost here. Many, if not all, of the supports and tracks for the People Mover would either need to be retrofitted or replaced entirely, after the damage done to them first by rocket rods and then by 2 decades of neglect. It would be costly, but it would restore elegance and a kinetic presentation central to the land's former identity, tying the overhead system to a lost vision of future transportation. And as long as we're talking long-term possibilities, let me add one more thing. The Fantasyland Theater hasn't come back in any large way after the pandemic. That theater, with its white canopy, occupies a large tract of land that stretches from Small World, runs the length of Storybook Land, and ends at Big Thunder. It's large enough for a small land or for an attraction that requires a big show building or a few attractions with smaller buildings. This is another area that at some point in the not too distant future will likely get a makeover. But I don't think that will be announced at the expo either. Over at DCA, the big question is, what will be added to Avengers Campus? When Avengers Campus opened last year, it had just one new attraction, some smaller show areas, and some dining locations. At one point, a big e-ticket had been announced for the Back of the Land, a Quinjet experience in which guests moved into battle with an experimental ride system that gave guests limited control over their movements. The ride's entrance, that big unused building with a Quinjet on top of it, was even arranged as part of the first phase of the campus. But with the pandemic and the money lost during those years, this e-ticket attraction faded away. I also suspect that another problem here is the story experience was deeply tied to Wakanda, and Disney perhaps wants to see how the Black Panther franchise will fare without its iconic star Chadwick Boseman, before betting hundreds of millions of dollars on a Wakanda-centered attraction. Because of the investment needed to create this attraction, I'm unsure if Disney will announce anything for Avengers Campus this year. Maybe it will be teased, with tomorrow saying something like, "Hold tight for an Avengers announcement in the coming months." But this is the largest area of need at DCA. Avengers Campus was supposed to help balance out demand between the two California parks. But day after day, Disneyland, which has far more attractions, including Rise of the Resistance, Indiana Jones, Space Mountain, and so on, still outperforms DCA by a lot. Avengers Campus, with a Spider-Man shooter ride and the inclusion of Mission Breakout, really didn't do much to draw larger crowds across the way to the newer park. A true e-ticket, I think, would go a long way to fixing that problem. But with reduced CapEx for the coming year, I don't think we'll see an announcement of a new ride that requires a unique ride system, as those types of attractions tend to be costly. For Downtown Disney, we'll probably see artwork showcasing the expansion areas presently under construction. We'll likely get a look at their plans to more deeply theme the Paradise Pier Hotel into a Pixar hotel. And one last thing about the California resort. Back in 2021, Disney put forward a proposal for Disneyland Forward, which was a plan to create a Disney Springs-style shopping district on land currently owned by Disney, as well as to expand both parks into Disney-owned land presently zoned for parking. The proposal contained only the most general concepts of what might be built, and was largely the opening salvo for a 2-year political discussion to persuade the city of Anaheim to allow Disney far more flexibility in zoning ordinances that regulate land that Disney presently owns. So far, the real discussions about Disneyland Forward have been about zoning and land control, not specific projects. As the political discussion is still ongoing, I don't expect to hear much in terms of specifics about the Disneyland Forward project, especially as discussions between Disney and the city, at least according to the press, haven't been going as well as Disney initially hoped. Though this concept generally might still be bandied about on stage, particularly to apply political pressure to Anaheim, I doubt we'll see any specific announcements related to it. Overall, I think we'll see significantly more new announcements for Florida than for California. Disney needs to fill its 36,000 on-property hotel rooms, which are central to its profit model. Also, Disney needs to preview some strategy to program against the opening of Epic Universe. In short, Disney has far more to lose in this moment in Florida than it does in California. In California, it only has 2,500 rooms, and those hotel rooms can be filled or largely filled by adjusting price, offering discounts, and so on. The California resort also has no imminent competition aside from Super Nintendo World presently being added to Universal Studios with a 2023 opening. This land at Universal features one significant ride, a Mario Kart experience that fuses dark ride elements with augmented reality. But I'd place this ride more or less on the same level of desirability as the Runaway Railway clone going into Toontown. We can quibble if the new ride at Universal will be better than Runaway Railway. Maybe it will. I believe it's quietly testing right now. But I think it will depend on how seamlessly and robustly those augmented reality elements are integrated into the new ride experience at Universal. But one ride, even a good one, is not enough to upset the financial environment of Southern California theme parks. A new park, however, with areas themed after highly desirable film properties, such as arranged into Epic Universe in Florida, has the potential to reconfigure the financial environment of the Central Florida theme parks and resorts. And that is generally why I'm pretty sure we will see American announcements more skewed to Florida at this expo than to California. On Sunday, September 11th at 10:30 a.m. Pacific Time, if you're at the expo, you can watch in person as Josh D'Amaro announces what Disney will engage in for the next 2 years. You can also watch a live stream at home. And now that we are at the end of this episode, an episode that I said last week would be short but is really kind of chunky, you have a pretty good overview for the possible announcements. Again, I expect only a few items from my list to be included in the actual announcements on stage. Disney is likely moving into a period of lower spending due to the recession, reduced revenues from the pandemic, and a smaller design workforce. There may also be a surprise or two in the announcements, things not even touched on here. But this list overall is a general guide based on company priorities, available land, attraction attendance, and perceived imbalances in park experiences that will likely guide a good deal of Disney's efforts with the U.S. parks into many years moving forward, both into next week's expo and beyond. With this list, once Josh D'Amaro makes his announcements, you will know if Disney, to use a baseball analogy, is swinging for the fences, or if Disney is trying to make a big deal out of an average hit that simply gets them on first base. As always, I'm hoping they're going to swing for the fences. But perhaps more importantly, this announcement will be Disney's last opportunity to preview its strategy to compete with Epic Universe during that new park's first couple of years. I think it would be a lost opportunity and a financially costly one if Disney didn't take Universal's new park as serious competition that once open would likely drain some annual visitors from the Disney bubble. But answers to nearly all of these questions will come in the very near future, when Josh D'Amaro takes the stage at the Anaheim Convention Center and explains to us what is really coming. Before I go today, a few things. If you're looking for the latest episode in our ongoing series about Dick Nunis and the early days of Disneyland, just look back one episode. It was posted a few days ago. And for the next couple of weeks, we're going to have a slightly wonky release schedule to accommodate the expo. Usually, we release shows on Sunday night, but this episode is coming out midweek to help everyone prepare for expo announcements. I'll post another episode in a few days that continues our story of Dick Nunis, and perhaps most importantly, our episode for the second week of September won't drop on Sunday night as usual, but will drop on Monday night, the day after the expo so we can explore all of the announcements and discuss what they mean. For that 1 week, it simply makes no sense to drop the show on Sunday. I'll be at the expo, the most important announcements for the park will be made that day, and I'll need a little time to reflect on them and assemble the material. Also, I'll need to drive home. So for that week, our show will drop on Monday, likely later in the evening. So for the next couple of weeks, just keep an eye on your podcast feed, and you'll see episodes that relate to the history of the Disney company and material that relates to the future of the studio and the parks. I think that there will be a lot of interesting things to discuss and unpack in the days ahead. As you know, we're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast. Without subscribers, we would simply cease to exist. We do just two things: deep dives on stories related to the history of the Disney studio and parks, and long-form news and analysis of current events as they relate to the Disney company. If you enjoy these episodes, you can support our efforts by becoming a monthly Bandcamp subscriber. On Bandcamp, you'll find dozens and dozens of extra episodes, but the best reason to subscribe is to make sure that this podcast continues to exist. You can subscribe at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. I'll also leave a link down in the show notes. Until then, this is Todd James Pierce.